Map or not? Each of us knows what a map is, and we simply do not have a problem recognizing maps. Thank you very much. But how we know something as a map is notoriously difficult to pin down. People frequently disagree about the mapness of artifacts, and often they include or exclude things for reasons they can't rationally explain. Similarly, there are disagreements about what constitutes a good map and what about the role ethics or aesthetics play in mapping. Why are there these disagreements, and maybe even more importantly, why is there ever any agreement at all? The difficulty arises in part because there has been no obvious way to isolate cartographic concerns from others that exist intertwined with them. For example, the challenges brought by the postmodern critique. These concerns will remain unaddressed if one assumes the problem is always cartographic. Map making is an activity of making arguments. Maps exist only to convince someone of something, and there have always been maps composed to create or to support partisan understandings. A not uncommon notion is that the problem ultimately lies in something problematic the map contains, something so toxic that it subverts the artifact itself, turning it from a map into something abhorrent. Sometimes aesthetics is similarly seen as a problematic element, as some sort of poisonous tincture that can, maybe, just a drop, be added to a map, but that ultimately must be eschewed in the interests of clarity and of honesty. This focus on map infection is, I maintain, a mistaken one that conflates and confuses all manner of issues, including issues of legitimacy, of aesthetics, and of ethics. We must recognize that the map artifact, in point of fact any artifact, is by itself inert. It can only take on meaning by being recognized as embodying meaning. The artifact must be transfigured into a formal conceptual map entity, by which act it is instantly placed into a context of things that are maps. A formal existence and context that exists only in the mind of the map reader. Only then can a map reading take place, and in fact, at that stage, a map reading is unavoidable. Clearly, this dichotomy of form and matter itself exists only in a formal analysis. In practice, the formal map is coexistence with its material embodiment, so why bother differentiating them? The answer is that doing so has utility. It allows us to examine a situation that is quite real, despite existing only in our minds. It must also be recognized that this formal abstraction must not be seen as dismissing other concerns, for example, ethical concerns. It does, however, assist us in seeing that ethical concerns are not intrinsic to mapping, but are instead brought to mapping by each practitioner and implemented through map reading or cartographic practice. Similarly, conceptual abstraction does not dismiss aesthetic concerns either, but shows them to be part and parcel of the instantiation of any map artifact. Aesthetics are a large part of the way we decide not only what the artifact is, but to a very large extent how good it is. Aesthetics are integral to the way cartography is carried out. Thus, we see that ethics and aesthetics are examples of concerns that participate in mapping, but are each themselves contingent and mutable in their particulars. Maps can be, and are, made with nefarious intent, just as ugly, confusing, unreadable maps can, and do, exist. And notwithstanding their ineptitude or deceitfulness, they are all maps, as can be seen in a formal analysis. It is only an abstract formal conceptual analysis that allows us, on the one hand, to account for so many things all being maps, and on the other, to clearly see how their various contingent and mutable aspects play out in allowing the artifact to be transfigured into a map. Formal analysis lays the groundwork upon which other critiques can build, and without it, there's no way of knowing if the foundations of our assumptions are sound. However, because it excludes so very much in order to be so broad and all-inclusive, Formal analysis is not and cannot be the end of the story. Maps make differences in how situations are understood, and the issues raised by postmodern, ethical, and aesthetic critiques, among others, are all pivotal to mapping, to cartographic practice, and to cartographers. However, in the absence of a clear, formal, conceptual understanding of the map, meaningfully addressing these concerns, the concerns these critiques raise, is just not possible. Rhetoric is, as we know, the ontological core of all map making and cartography. A cartography is, in essence, an advocate for themselves or for others, and ethical concerns and advocacy can never be dismissed out of hand. This is because not all advocates strive to make the worst case seem the better. No, not all of them. But the fact remains that they can do it, either deliberately or inadvertently, and that they not infrequently do. Thus, it is critically important for a mapmaker's own sake that they not fall into the laissez-faire ethical relativism that holds that any map that is accurate and precise is, by that virtue alone, neither wrong nor misleading. Similarly, cartographers must resist the temptation of the everyone is guilty, so no one is guilty ethical shrug that often takes the form of such bromides as maps are designed to make lies appear truthful, misinformation respectable, and to give the appearance of fact to pure illusion, as if such platitudes absolve the mapmaker of all responsibility. There are alternative models, among them Stephen Halloway's right map making, the graphic design-oriented First Things First 2000 manifesto also comes to mind, as does, too, Mario Savio's 1964 Put Your Bodies Upon the Gears declaration. These responses all focus responsibility on the active agent and stress that it is incumbent upon that agent, in our case the map maker, to rise to that challenge. The ethicist, geographer, and one-time NACIS member Tom Koch has provided what seems to be the best cartographer-targeted introduction to these difficult matters. In his 2017 book, Ethics in Everyday Places, he writes about what happens when, as he puts it, you do everything right, but you know you've done something wrong. Koch notes that as a lot of working cartographers are sometimes uneasy about the ethics of their work, but because they do not possess a clearly articulated moral paradigm that must be transposed into a daily ethic of practice, their often high-toned and moral pronouncements have generally been deficient in their practical application. Remember, ethics is not about the maps you make. It's about you. Not as a cartographer, not as an employee, not as a team player, but about you as a person. As Socrates says in Plato's Republic, the argument concerns no causal topic, but one's whole manner of living. What then of aesthetics? I've already mentioned that they sit squarely in the center of the instantiation of the map artifact. Remember, aesthetics is not just the pretty part, nor is it the decoration. Indeed, aesthetics could be called the pivot upon which the whole map turns. What makes a map clear? Aesthetics. What makes a map usable? Aesthetics. How do we know it's a good map? Aesthetic judgments on the elements of mapicity. The particulars of aesthetics vary across culture and time, but every map artifact largely relies upon them to invoke transfiguration into maphood. There are simply no two ways about it. We can see that both ethics and aesthetics are good examples of how an abstract, formal conceptual analysis allows us to usefully frame one complex set of, in this case cartographic, issues by conceptually isolating them from another set, in this case ethical or aesthetic, yet allowing them to keep their contextual relation. This demonstrates the utility, and indeed the necessity, of a conceptual cartographic analysis. The end. Thank you very much. So, I see that I've convinced everybody. Now go forth and tell your brothers and sisters and spread this message of good news. Thank you very much.